YouTube for the Tuesday edition of the Not Your Average Investor Show. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez, back together again from a long hiatus of his vacation, my vacation. We're all back in the house. We got the man that I like to call GC because of his genius concepts, because he knows how to generate cash flows, because he's a great co-host, and because his name is Gregg Cohen. Say hello, Greg.
Hello, everybody. Fantastic to be back with you here today.
Fantastic to be back together and to have the lady that we call MTM, because she brings us the moments that matter. She's our community manager that is making everything easy. Anything you need in the chat, you reach out to her. We call her Madison the Magnificent. Say hello, Madison.
Hi, everybody.
And, GC, I feel like we've been apart for so long, and yet I know that if I ever forget anything that I don't know about rental income properties, where would you suggest that I go to just catch up on the things that I need to know?
Man, there is this beautiful cacophony of a course that has been created to help all of you out there learn a little bit about rental property investing. If you're brand new, this course will help you. And if you're an experienced investor, and you want to know what it's like to go from maybe 1 or 3 or 5 rental properties to call it 300 or more, I know the course just for you. It's called the Not Your Average Investor Guide, the smart way to investing in rental properties. And I would encourage all of you to be a part of that. We have, Pablo, I was telling everybody, we have over 250 folks that have enrolled in the course so far. And yeah, so I had incredible insight. I know we've received a number of testimonials from members of the Not Your Average Investor Show community. So thank you all for sharing those wonderful testimonials on the course. But go to notyouraverage.guide.com, notyouraverage.guide.com, costs $9.97. And I tell you, if you ask any of the folks in the chat, do you think you'll earn more back than $9.97 once you watch that course? I can tell you the answer is an astounding yes. So I hope all of you take advantage of it, and we'll see you in the course.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, we put a lot of love and a lot of energy and some good humor into that course. It's a good hang, a little bit under 2 hours, go from 0 to 60, from an average investor to not an average investor, from not knowing what we're talking about here on the show to knowing what we're talking about on the show and being able to tune in, be part of the inside jokes, and be part of what else, GC?
The roll call, baby.
Oh, baby, we back in here with our leadoff hitter.
John Henning.
Henning with a good afternoon. We got Big Papa in the house. We love it when he calls it Big Papa.
Pops, how are you, man? Good to see you, buddy.
Greg's dad, Jay Cohen. We got the ringmaster of the Not Your Average Investor Show community,
Andrew Barnhill.
Drew Barnhill saying good day, everybody. We got the early bird checking in from Columbus, Ohio.
Mr. Dean Curry.
Mr. Dean Curry. We got Christopher Lee from Fernandina Beach back in the house. We got our regulars, the second family of the Not Your Average Investor Show community, Gary and Rosalind Riley from Murrieta, California. Our regards.
We regard you.
We regard you. We got Chris Chica. Oh, Donna Chica. Chris's mom is in the house from Bakersfield, California.
Fantastic.
Am I thinking about the wrong
Chris and Donna, I think, are married. I think you made that a little awkward, but whatever.
Chris and Donna. Sorry about that. That's a little awkward. We got the mother of the godmother of the Not Your Average Investor Show community. You know who that is?
Of course, Lydia Filson.
World famous Lydia Filson. We got
the mountain man, Billy Green.
Billy Green from the heat wavy mountains of Colorado. We got our favorite Pacific Northwesterner in the house with a trademark good morning, good afternoon.
That would be Nadeem Shah.
Nadeem Shah.
You know, it's a little more tricky here when I don't see what's going on in the chat too. I like this. This is challenging. It's like rapid fire.
That's right. You're really on. And then there's also a little extra lag. So you're actually really answering this faster than it sounds. We got the maven of real estate in Denver, Colorado.
Leslie Wilson.
That's Leslie Wilson. Who else we got in here? We got the karaoke witness, Deborah
Schwartz.
We got Tony D in the house, man. We haven't seen Tony D in here in a while, man.
Special day.
Yeah, special day. We got Robert Jones, Bob Jones from Atlanta, Georgia. Good to have you in here. Who else? We got
from the Dirty Jers.
From the Dirty Jers saying, what up, JWB fam? What were you going to say, GC?
I saw my mom just said hello in the chat. Wanted to make sure I said hello to my mom, Debbie White. Thank you for being on the call.
Debbie, and I'm just kind of scrolling through. I want to get this going. It's a little bit clunky with us at different places, but I do have to acknowledge our favorite name when she checks in, Erin O'Neill. Into the light. Good to have it. All right, and we got Marilyn Cotterman from Homosassa, Florida. You may not have heard.
Home of the manatees.
It's the home of the manatees. We got the first family in the house, Ken and Carolyn Moline back from 2 weeks of mission work in Baja. But you know what we do with them? Ooh, we salute
you.
We salute you. All right, cool. Let's get this going. GC, I'm on a cruise, just enjoying my time in Europe with my family, NBD, and you start just like hammering me with texts because all these headlines are coming out and I'm reading these headlines and I'm like, what the heck is going on? Because what they're saying is that there's a 15% increase in foreclosures and the world is going to end and all these different things from the headlines. But then when I click into the article, I realize not so fast, my friend, right? Like it feels like the headline is there to grab your attention, but it quickly goes into this idea that it's not, that we are 15% up, but not, which is nearing pre-COVID-19 totals, right? So like the first thing I read is that, we're actually not even at where we were before COVID. And then the next thing I read is like that it's not that all these people suddenly can't afford their mortgage. It's just banks catching up on it. And then the next thing I read is that another big difference between the things that were happening then and that this isn't like the big financial disaster is that all these people have a bunch of money in their homes. So they're opting to sell instead, which sounds very familiar to what you're saying. But I wanted to, bring up kind of just what I read in the first couple of articles that I read just very quickly and ask you what you thought about this stuff when you first opened up.
It feels like anything that's related to a potential home crash or buzzwords like foreclosures or anything like that is going to be highlighted. And, we talk a lot about data without perspective, and data without perspective is dangerous. And this, I think what we have here again is another example of data without perspective being dangerous because, let's face it, people just read the headlines. And if you are preconditioned as the general public is to expect a housing crash or a housing decline, and you continue to get hammered over and over and over again with headlines like this, like foreclosures are up 15%, you might decide or you might conclude that this might not be as good of an asset to invest in. You might make a poor choice. And so I think what we have here is another example of data without perspective. And so I'm excited. The reason I was blowing you up is because I was excited about sprinkle a little bit of perspective on this data and on this headline.
I know that you are a general sprinkler of perspective when it comes to this type of stuff, man. I know that you enjoy it. And when it comes to this data without perspective, right? Like the other side of it is the media likes to do data without perspective. And we also talk a lot about aligning incentives on the show, right? Today, these days, it's not to malign the people in the media or what they're doing, but the way that the game is played is it's a per click model. It's similar to in the early 1900s when they were selling by the issue and they'd say extra, read all about it, and they had to sell on headlines, right? So to me, the first thing that I realize is that there's a headline that says foreclosures are up 15%, and then immediately the body of the text goes into tempering what that headline is about. But we also know that, that headline is going to get the click, and then that drives that behavior that they're incentivized. And if you read the whole article, it's not as alarming, even without all the perspective that you're about to bring in, right? But like still the psychological factor of, hey, my Aunt Sally just saw this. She knows that I'm an investor, so I'm going to get a text from her and it's going to cause this like concern, I think is one of the privileges that we get to have on the show of like tempering all that kind of stuff and like calming the seas and making people feel a little bit better, right?
I think so. I mean, it's so emotionally charged when we think about a foreclosure crisis because many of us, on the show, I'm guessing all of us were deeply affected by the foreclosure crisis that happened in 2008 and 2009 and 2010, right? Whether you were investing in real estate or not, you were deeply affected by it. So, that combined with just the lack of time that people have right now is what, the real harm is here is a headline like this with emotionally charged subjects like we all have been a part of, like foreclosures, and the lack of time that we all have to actually read the article leads to poor conclusions. And, that's one reason we have the show is to shed some light on what really this is. And does it matter? Does it not matter? By now, you can obviously tell that, I think this is another example of a headline that really doesn't matter when it comes to home prices.
Yeah, I can tell that that's where you're headed. And let's talk about the data in a second. I do think it is interesting that when it comes to real estate, particularly, you and I have this conversation often, right? Like people as investors seem to be less emotionally invested when they invest in every other asset class, right? Like they really aren't that emotional about their stocks. Like they don't know the CEO of the company that they have $200,000 in or their employment agreements. Yet when it comes to real estate, people have this much bigger emotional reaction. Therefore, when it comes to the emotion of it, we've had, I forgot his name in the past, behavioral finance guys talking about like the emotion around investing in real estate and all this stuff. I think it does prey into that weak spot that we already know we have. So addressing the emotion around it, I think is important. I think it's a clear distinction, right?
100%. But there's a proven way to succeed as an investor. It's been proven. If you can do your best to remove the emotion of when you are making decisions with your money, you're going to do better, right? And so we have an opportunity here with talking about what this foreclosure headline really means, but we have a bigger opportunity when it comes to investing in rental properties specifically to separate the emotion from what this asset class can do for you, because largely in the other investment decisions that you make, you already have done that. And many of you have been very successful that way. So we know it can be done. But for many people, it's another hurdle to overcome, is removing the emotion from rental property investing in general.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. All right. So talk to me about the data, man. Give us some data and some perspective, GC. What you got?
Yeah. Do you have those graphs fired up so we can start to weave some things in here?
I'm ready. I'm ready to they are fired and I'm ready to weave. But
you ready? All right. Let's talk about this headline. It says that foreclosures are up 15% year over year. 15% year over year. Oh my goodness. What does that mean? Well, I think it's important to realize a couple of things. Percentages can be manipulated, right? We have to think about, what is that 15% up from? And what was going on a year or 2 years ago when we're throwing some of these numbers out? So as we may remember, we had a foreclosure moratorium that ended sometime a year or two ago. I can't remember exactly when. But so that baseline number of when that foreclosure moratorium ended, and then the fallout, right? It took a long time for banks to be able to actually start to foreclose again. So your baseline number of this 15% is way artificially low, right? So think about this, right? That 15% is a little bit, it is greatly misleading, and it's because that original baseline number is way low. But go ahead and fire that chart up here, because I wanted to show people what a real foreclosures crisis looks like, right? For those of us who were investing in 2008, like I owned 40 rental properties in 2006, and both my mom and my dad are on this call right now, which is awesome. They can tell you that, I know what it's like to buy 40 rental properties and then have a real foreclosure crisis happen, and then seeing the values of those properties go down on paper. And of course, why I still own them today and why they've turned out to be great investments. But this is what a real foreclosures crisis looks like. This information is coming from January to June. So we're taking this year of 2023, and we're looking back January to June of other years. So 2008, we had 1.3 million foreclosures in the first half. In 2010, we had 1.6 million foreclosures in 2010. Pablo, can you read that number for me of 2023? What's the number of foreclosures that we have for all of our friends on the podcast?
185,580.
Was that thousands or was that millions?
Thousands, yeah.
Thousands, right? And if you're not,
it isn't even as many thousand. Like if you take the million out, it's about half of the thousands, right?
you can cut this a million different ways. You're not going to get to 1.3 or 1.6 million anytime soon, right? So this is data with perspective, right? This is why inside my walls at JWB, we have not talked at all about foreclosures, because it doesn't matter. When you have the perspective here and you understand what this 15% increase really means in the greater perspective of what a real foreclosure crisis looks like, you wouldn't even write that article, right? Or you maybe you would, because you need to get clicks, you need to make money, but you at least would not contribute to fear-mongering, which a lot of articles today do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. And back to what you were saying too, of this idea of, number one, when we have the perspective of the historical, when it looked like a foreclosure crisis and something was really happening, the numbers were, I don't even know, is that 100x more, like somewhere between 100 and 200x what it is today. But even the 15% increase, right? Like even the return of where we're at by 2020, we're still way below 2019 and 2018 and 2017 and 2016 and 2014 and like 2014 was the year that I feel like every single person that listens to the show, if you ask them, would you like a time machine and $100,000 to go back to 2014 and put it on Jacksonville properties? They'd be like, yes. Right. And even those numbers then were more than 3x what the foreclosure number is right now in 2023, right? So like, again, data with perspective. And then you go to 2021 where you said it was artificially low, and then now it's back to these like 2020 numbers, right? So like, it does feel like when you put this perspective in it, it feels like a pretty insignificant macroeconomic number.
That's what it is. Nobody in 2014 said, oh, you know what? I really want to invest in real estate, but I'm really worried about the number of foreclosures that have happened in the first 6 months of 2014. I can guarantee you that. So,
well, I mean, I'm sure somebody said that and then didn't invest in real estate and therefore wishes they invested in real estate. You're talking about the people that actually invested in real estate and are super happy with that investment, right?
There you go. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Awesome, man. You got some more data for us, GC?
I do. So I wanted to go a little bit farther and not sprinkle just a little bit of perspective on, but I wanted to go further down this path. Maybe I'm wrong with that. Maybe that data right there maybe I'm reading it wrong. Maybe you're all reading it wrong. So let's continue to go down the path of what this would mean if this 15% increase was actually significant. So something else to keep in mind. And this is that next chart. So we need to look at the average days to complete foreclosures. Okay. The average days to complete foreclosures just hit an all-time high. And the reason this is significant is because what's actually happening here, these foreclosures that have increased 15%, this 185,000 that happened in the first 6 months of this year, are not new foreclosures, right? These are foreclosures that have been in the works, where banks have finally gotten their act together and finally have felt that it was okay to start foreclosing again, so that it takes a long time for these foreclosures to actually materialize. So the average days to complete the foreclosure is over 1,200 days right now. When I started to invest in 2006 and we first started to understand what a real foreclosure is, generally on average, your days to complete the foreclosures was a lot less. In fact, actually now would be a great time to pull up that chart because I think it has some data there. Yeah, so if you go back to 2007, right, you were under 200 days to complete a foreclosure. And that's, it has taken longer than that in recent years, but call it, a year to complete a foreclosure, right? 1,200 days on average is what? That's 4 years almost, right? So what's happening is this backlog of foreclosures that banks could not do during the moratorium is actually what's coming through the system now. And that's why your average days to complete a foreclosure is a lot higher. And I do think that if I'm thinking like the media and talking about this, this headline is going to grab, attention. So I see that this headline is going to continue to grab attention for the foreseeable future. You're going to hear about more and more foreclosures, but pay attention to the average days to complete the foreclosure. Once you see that actually start coming down closer to, call it a year, or maybe a little bit longer than that based on historical reference here, that's when you're really going to see the foreclosures actually be real and that system will actually be working the way that it was pre-pandemic.
Gotcha. G, I want you to get through kind of like all this. I know that you have some perspective to put with the data segment, and then I'm going to ask some investor related questions from the perspective of who I am, right, as your client. But right now, I feel like if I'm looking at this chart and I'm thinking that the average days to complete a foreclosure has gone up to astronomically, that doesn't feel good, right? Like even right now, whether you're saying like a year to complete a foreclosure, that sounds terrifying, right? Like, is that how much like JWB clients are, how long they have taken to foreclose on a property? Like give me a little bit more from the from the investor perspective of what this chart actually means to me if I'm thinking days to complete a foreclosure are going up, and that's going to mean that I'm out of rental income and whatnot as this is happening.
Ah, okay. And I love this show, and I love our back and forth because I never thought that that would be a concern. So when you see this data, your concern is the amount of time that you would go without rental income.
Yeah.
Ah, you're mixing up foreclosure and eviction.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not alone, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
a foreclosure would be, Pablo, like you owning the property, and then you not paying the bank the mortgage payment, and the bank taking the house back from you, right? The eviction would be, Pablo, you own the property, you rent the home out to a resident, that resident doesn't pay the rent, you would have to evict that resident. So definitely not the same thing. You do not have to wait 4 years for an eviction, right? Your typical eviction is about 45 days or so here in the state of Florida, which is really a lot quicker than other parts of the country, which is another reason why people like to invest in the state of Florida.
Man, I'm super pumped we just went there because I was freaking out. So then if I'm thinking about this the right way, and I hope, like I love my role as the noble fool on this show. I just haven't been able to like genuinely play it for a long time, but now I feel like I'm right there, right? Like if I'm watching this show, at first I was thinking, oh man, this means that I'm not going to be able to find a tenant for my home. But really what I should be thinking is what they are poking at when it comes to foreclosures is hinting not that vacancy rates are going up or anything like that. They're hinting at the idea that property prices are going to go down by saying that foreclosures are up. Is that kind of like what the fear would be if foreclosures were to go up?
Exactly. What people may be saying is, what happened during the great financial crisis in the Great Recession was that you had a huge spike in foreclosures, and that led to severe depression of prices. And so now they're looking for early indicators that you might have the same type of thing. And their thought process is not wrong if you just stopped there, but clearly this is a very different scenario than 2008. So in 2008, at some point, I'm sure you had 15% increase in foreclosures in the first 6 months year over year, but this is completely different. This is, up 15% from basically zero from previous years because of the foreclosure moratorium. And so your overall foreclosure activity is still incredibly low, which would mean that we are nowhere near a foreclosure crisis, which would mean that this is not a catalyst for this real estate crash that people have been talking about for years and years and years.
I think that's the word that threw me off, is moratorium, right? Because I had only heard about like eviction moratoriums up until now. And this is the first time that we brought up a foreclosure moratorium.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the foreclosure moratorium? I really don't know anything about that. That existed.
It was in place right when the eviction moratorium was in place, and the banks were not allowed to foreclose on properties. There were some rules and regulations and all that good stuff. But yeah, during the pandemic, there was a foreclosure moratorium as well as an eviction moratorium.
Got it. All right. So then if I'm listening now and I'm trying to make sense of all this stuff, now that I am no longer a fool, I feel like this 15% jump, actually, you know what? I'm going to before we start going into like strategy, let's keep going down the data. I know you got one more perspective and data point that you want to talk about.
Yeah, this last one I think is the most critical for us to think about, because I want to prepare everybody in this headline, what to look for. And I'll tell you what really is significant. And we have to understand that in a foreclosure process, let's say that it typically takes a year, right? That's a long time. Right now, it's taken 4 years on average, but a year is still a long time. So when they're talking about foreclosure starts being up 15%, that's just the start. What actually would depress a housing market would be foreclosure finishes or sales, because that's where, in essence, properties would be sold on the market at much lower prices, at depressed prices, at discounted prices. So what I wanted to show people is, what does an actual foreclosure sales market look like that actually was the Great Recession? Because again, I was investing at that time and I have all that data. So let's fire up that last chart there, and I'm going to show you, I think this is going to be mind blowing here. So what I'm showing you here is 2006 to 2023, the percentage of sales overall in Jacksonville, Florida, that were foreclosures, not starts. I'm talking finishes of foreclosures here after that year to 4 years. So in January 2006, we were at 5% of all the sales in Jacksonville were foreclosures. REOs is another word if you're a real estate professional. REO, that's what I'm talking about here. And then in 2007, it was largely flat, but things started to get real wonky in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and even 12 and 13, right? We jumped up from 5% of overall sales in the market to up to over 30% of all sales were foreclosures in that market. Pablo, what happened in pricing from 2008 to 2012?
It went down.
It went way down. So if you want to correlate what a crash would actually be, it would be the percentage of foreclosure sales, not starts. Foreclosure sales is what I am paying attention to and what you should be paying attention to. Now, in reality, Pablo, can you tell me what the number is for the percentage of foreclosure sales here in 2023?
It seems under 1%.
Yeah. So I said I'm paying attention to it because I'm always paying attention to it. We look at this monthly. But do you really think I'm starting to pay attention to this and prepare for this upcoming crash based on foreclosures?
It doesn't feel like it's something that keeps you up at night.
No. A typical market will have about 5 to 10% of overall sales will be REOs or foreclosures in a market. Guys, we're less than 1%. And we've been less than 1% for years. And we've been less than 5% since 2017, So again, this would be a trigger that would actually make me think we might have some type of a crash company coming or a depression company coming or, housing values going down. But that is not the case here. And I will add one more thing. Even if I did start to think that foreclosures were going up at a rate that was higher than 10%, we got to think about the money that we as a economy have in our equity in our homes. In 2006, people got any type of loan they could with 0% down, which meant they did not have equity in their homes. Today, people put down 20%, 25% sometimes. There are no 0% down loans for the general public. And oh, by the way, we had 40% home price appreciation over the last couple of years. So even if foreclosures started to tick up as far as starts going up, which is what I expect will happen, you're going to see all of those things get cleared up before they would show up as foreclosure sales, because those homeowners have the ability to sell their home with the equity that they have in place and not ruin their credit. And the majority of homeowners will do that. Another reason why we will not have a housing crash because of this.
That is a key differentiator there to bring it all in, right? Because the article itself said people have money in their, people have, all this equity in their homes, so they don't believe that there's going to be a big crisis. And yet you get this like gaudy number, but the number is the stat of foreclosure starts, right? Not the stat of foreclosure finishes. So this is what almost feels like, it would feel like a leading indicator if you didn't have any perspective, right? Like the number of foreclosure starts should be directly correlated to the number of foreclosure finishes, unless there's another variable, which is the number of foreclosure starts correlated to how much equity people have built in their own home in the very recent past, will definitely have a giant different effect of what the leading versus ending indicator will end up being, right? People right now have options because they have money in their homes in the form of equity, and they are going to sell at a market price that is still going to allow them to walk away with real money in their pocket, because also there is a dearth of supply and a huge amount of demand for these homes. So they're still going up market price way before they get to foreclosures. They're going to end up selling at retail. So that leading indicator of foreclosure starts doesn't mean nearly as much as what the foreclosure finishes is going to be.
Exactly. Well said, brother.
I learned quickly out here, man. I came in here thinking we were talking about evictions. And
I
now I
love this.
totally get the foreclosure thing. But I swear to you, for the last like 3 days, I just be like, oh man, yeah, these numbers, this is crazy. And with completely different questions lined up. All right, we got some good questions in the Q&A before you and I start pontificating a little bit more on what strategy should be here. Jillian Noel says, it depends on the location too. I think Florida is a great place to invest, even with the high insurance costs. What do you think about the idea of, these are national numbers, right, that they're putting out, but you're putting forth Jacksonville numbers? Can you tell me a little bit about the national versus local numbers of what we just saw in this data?
Yeah, the data that I'm representing for the first two charts was national data. So when we're talking about foreclosure starts, it's up 15% nationally from the first 6 months of last year to this year. The last chart is I'm looking at just Jacksonville data because that's what's important for us to track in our market, because that's really what's going to dictate if there was going to be a pricing change there. So important to look at both for sure. But more important when we're talking about pricing, shouldn't even be having a discussion if this is going to, affect pricing until you start to see that percentage of REOs or percentage of foreclosure sales go up dramatically, which I don't expect that's going to happen.
Got it. And Danette Colvin's asking me to put up the charts again. So this is these are national charts, right? These first half US foreclosures activity per year that have gone down for a while and then have just blipped back up. Then there's the average days to complete a foreclosure. That's also a national chart that has been going up throughout the years. And then we got this chart here of Jacksonville that shows how the percentage of sales from foreclosures were somewhere in the 30 to 35% range during, like 25 to like 35% range during the Great Recession, and the rundown of property prices in Jacksonville, and that have steadily decreased to just about like under 1% here in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Ken Moline, patriarch of the first family, asks, how does this national rate of foreclosures compare to the JWB rate of evictions over the past several years? Is there any correlations that you're aware of, foreclosures to evictions or anything like that, GC?
I've never correlated it. I know off the top of my head, I don't see any direct correlation. I mean, I will say that when we had the foreclosure moratorium and the eviction moratorium, both foreclosures and evictions were at an all-time low because we were not able to evict and banks were not able to foreclose. So I'm sure there's some correlation there. But no, I don't think there's much correlation. But you know what? I'll write it down, Ken, and I'll see if there's anything there and I'll report back to you on it.
Yeah. And one of the things that the Maven herself brought up in the chat is the idea that if someone gets foreclosed upon, they go into the renting pool, right?
Yeah.
So I would assume that maybe there's a positive correlation between foreclosures and rental demand, anything like that.
Harder for them to rent as well when you get a
Harder for them
foreclosure on your credit. That is something that we would look at and potentially deny a renter because of that, and other property management companies would as well. But yes, I mean, in theory, that demand, people have to live somewhere. So in theory, that demand would go there. I just don't think there's much there. I mean, the reason, so like if I go back to 2006 to 2010, I don't think that there's not a huge correlation between the eviction rate and the foreclosure rate. You're not going to see evictions went up to 30%. And the reason was because the loans that people got in 2001 through 2006 were bad loans. We became unhinged as how we were lending money out in our country. And, they were called ninja loans, no income, no job or assets, ninja loans. They had their own acronym. That's how people were getting loans. And then you could get a ninja loan with 0% down. So, I mean, we became unhinged as far as how we were lending money out. And that was the correlating effect to later down the line, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, when those loans, which were variable and only had 2-year teaser rates, when they started to go up and people couldn't afford them, that's what led to the spike in foreclosure percentage sales. You didn't have any of that on evictions. So yeah, I don't think there's much correlation there. But like I said, I'll take a look for the data that we have and I'll go back and see if there was anything there.
Yeah, and you kind of answered the question that Dean Curry then came up with, that then Leslie put in the chat of, would somebody that has experience of foreclosure have trouble renting from JWB?
Yeah, they would. It's something that we look at. We have criteria that's just a no-go for us. And then we have some criteria that we're going to take it within the context of a number of other factors. And so that would be in the context of a number of other factors, but it's definitely going to make it more difficult.
Got it. Cool. All right. Robert Jones got a question here. Outside of the moratorium aspect, why do you think the banks are taking so long to foreclose? Do you think it may have to do with the bank's bookkeeping strategy and banks having foreclosure homes on their books? In other words, completing a foreclosure in less than a year would put more foreclosed homes on the bank's books, making the bank unbalanced and unstable, more apt to fail.
Great question, Robert. So keep that one up there, Pablo, just so I can make sure I'm understanding all aspects of the question there. So, just overall, when somebody's not paying on the mortgage, I mean, that's not good for the bank either. And so, the idea of just keeping that in place and allowing people to not pay and extending the foreclosure process to do that doesn't help the bank there. So I don't think that they're doing that. I think that it has taken a long time for banks to be able to foreclose again. And I think and I heard this, so I haven't done the research on it, but I think that in some states like California, the foreclosure moratorium, it wasn't that long between when it ended. I mean, it was even more extended in some states like that. So it is not like just when the foreclosure moratorium ended in Florida that it was like, all right, banks are ready to go. There's a process of being able to do that within the bank. And then there's also just an emotional component about this too, right? I mean, banks are run by people too. And, for the last, couple of years, our country has been getting on our feet. And so I think that there is, you don't want to be the big bad bank of coming in and just slamming everybody with foreclosures as well. There's more of a process of working out payments, which helps banks, be the good guy here instead of being the bad guy. So if it was just about making money for the banks, I think that you would see them push these foreclosures through as quickly as possible. Again, because if they push them through, the chances of the bank taking the property back on their books, very slim. If they push these foreclosures through, it gets, done in a year instead of 4 years, then that would just go to auction and the property would sell. The property would have sold before it got to auction, and it would be off the bank's books, and all of that would take care of itself. So I think your point, as far as banks being very mindful of what makes their books look bad, is very astute, and they're very aware of that. But because you have so much equity in these homes, I think banks are going to push foreclosures as much as they can over the next year.
Interesting, man. That question went way over my head, but that was a really good explanation, man. Michael Santora is saying in the chat, banks don't want to own physical real estate, but I think we've talked a little bit in the past about how banks figured this out, right? Like in the Great Recession. The Great Recession happened because we lost all generational knowledge of kind of being in this scenario. But right now there's people in banks that lived through this point where it would have been way more beneficial for them to hold on to a property as opposed to take an L, and they know how to maneuver it right now, right?
That's a really good point. Banks have learned from the Great Recession. They have teams that are set up to take on properties and, renovate them and dispose of them. They are not caught, behind the 8 ball now like they were in 2008. It was a brand new thing for banks to take, call it 30% of the properties that sold in Jacksonville in 1 month back as REO property. So yeah, your point's really valid. Even if they did get to the point where they ended up taking a lot of properties back, banks would be okay. It would not be as much of a laggard on their systems and their processes, and in essence, not as much of a downside on their books.
Cool. Awesome. Donna Chica has more of a client specific question here but she made it to the show. So I'm going to ask you here, right? It doesn't really have to do with this foreclosure moratorium, but she's asking, I have been advised by my property manager that I need to pay the insurance invoice on my properties rather than the invoice going through JWB. If owners are paying the insurance invoices, would this skew the ROI being reported by JWB? My CPA has said he will be using the management report for the numbers to report on my tax return. If I pay the insurance invoice, will the expenses being reported from the management report be accurate? How does this work?
Donna, great question. So the simple answer is we make the ROI report as accurate as the input of data that we have. And so for almost all clients, when it comes to insurance, your insurance is paid through your monthly payment to the bank. It's what's called escrowed. So your bank payment is actually your principal and interest, as well as your property taxes and your insurance. So it's easy in that regard for most clients. However, there are some clients that, for whatever reason, you need to pay the insurance payment outside of whatever the mortgage payment would be, or if you own a property in cash. And so to answer your question, does that reflect accurately on your client ROI report? Absolutely. We do our best to stay ahead of that information. But if you have information and your insurance payment has changed, just send that right to your portfolio manager. And we're happy to update that in our reporting as well. And then it'll be squared away.
There you go. Michael Santoria says, Greg, in the same article, it says the 2-year is up 185%, which we saw in the chart. I can show it again, right?
Yeah.
It says the 2-year is up 185%. He thinks that they would have gotten much more clicks if they led with that. What do you think about that, man?
I mean, sure, they would have gotten more clicks. I guess it's data. It even lacks more perspective because there was a foreclosure moratorium at that point, but Michael's point's very accurate. So
yeah. Maybe the headline writer respected the amount of perspective of like knowing that there was a foreclosure moratorium 2 years ago, and it would have felt much more real of like, oh, the last 3 months, right?
I wonder if they had the data that we have. And actually, I think I answered my own question here, because those charts that I showed you were largely from some of those articles that I was, blowing you up with, Pablo. Yeah. So it's funny. I was going to ask, if they had the access to the data like we have, would they still write articles like this? And I guess I answered my question. The answer is yes, because they did have the access to the data, because I got it from the rest of their article.
Everybody's got access to the data in the internet age, Greg. They don't have access to perspective, which is why the value proposition of showing up to the show, listening to the show, so they can hear from somebody that has $1 billion, asset management, whatever, however much you have under management and the 17 years of experience that you have and the thousands of clients that you served. That's the value that you insert into the equation, and I insert by getting to ask you the questions, right?
Guess so, man. I guess so. Thank you very much.
You take compliments so easily. All right. No, Billy Green, the Mountain Man, says, are most hard money lenders quick to move to foreclosure after a 1-month default?
Are most hard money lenders quick to move to foreclosure after a 1-month default? Hard money lenders come in all shapes and sizes. And so I wouldn't, you have some very professional companies that are hard money lenders. And then you have a number of folks that I just spoke to in this Real Estate Investors Association who, lend out $300,000-$500,000 of their own money or their family's money. So it's hard to kind of paint a broad stroke as far as hard money lenders. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. My guess would be no. Most hard money lenders do not want to take the property back, and they just want you to pay. And so the best way to do that is to do a workout if they believe the borrower can actually get out of their own problem, get out of their own way. So yeah, I would say generally no, but take that with a grain of salt. It's very specific on your relationship with your individual hard money lender.
Got it. Cool. Thanks. Danette Colvin's got a question that I wanted to ask, and I want to just kind of set some context to this, right? So we're talking about foreclosure rates have gone up 15% in the first 6 months of this year. We have said that, that is essentially a headline that is written to like inspire fear, that to make you believe that the housing prices are going to go down across the board, and therefore maybe you don't want to invest in real estate. We are disproving that fact right now, right? Like that is an insignificant figure. The indicators for foreclosure starts are not the same as foreclosure finishes. And there is a bunch of different data points that tell us that this many starts are not going to lead to the same amount of finishes, right? Mostly the fact that you have a bunch of equity in people's homes that have accrued over the last recent history, over the last couple of years. But you still hear there's 15%, there's this number of foreclosures going out. So I think it's natural to think, well, is there a deal out there for investors themselves, right? So Danette's asking, will the JWB community be offered opportunities to purchase foreclosures in the near future?
The answer would be no. That's not who we are and what we serve. Our clients want this to be a passive investment. They want this to be a consistent, reliable, easy investment. Pablo, do you think investing in foreclosures is consistent, passive, easy, or reliable?
I mean, I don't know about most of those, but I definitely know it's not easy or passive.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's, you're taking on a lot of risk in a lot of different forms. So, that's just not who we are. We are not that source of discounted real estate. We're not built for the active investor. So this would not be in anticipation, even if the number of foreclosed properties did go up in Jacksonville. You shouldn't look to JWB as being a source or a solution for you, just because that's not who we are. We are easy. We're making this asset class accessible to everyday investors, and largely people are pulling their money out of the stock market and reallocating it into their JWB portfolio. And they want that same type of experience of investing in the stock market as you get with investing in rental properties with JWB. And so they wouldn't be interested in taking on the additional risk or the headache of investing in foreclosures.
Yeah, that's where my head went, man. My head went, man, if I was somebody that wasn't working 100 hours a week on my own business or my career or doing all the things that I want to do and wasn't thinking of real estate as a passive investment, then I'd be thinking, hey, maybe right now, if I want to be an active investor, I go pound the pavement, and go pick up those extra foreclosure deals, and maybe, and then go find a contractor and fix it up, and then go find a tenant and put him in, and then maybe flip that house or whatever I'm going to do. But from my perspective, that is not at all the relationship I want with my real estate portfolio. I want a relationship with my real estate portfolio similar to the way that I have purchased investments in the past, right? Like I just want to know what my return is. I want to know where my money is going. I want to know how much I got to get in to get out, and then have an expert on the other side of the line that checks in with me that I have access to. So this idea of investing in a foreclosure for me is very, very not for me, right?
Yeah. Even
Whereas,
if you could increase your return on investment by 5% or 10%, you're like, nah, it's not even in the equation. It's just
correct.
Yeah.
Like to me, the next 6 months to a year of my life that it would take to be able to capitalize on a foreclosure, my efforts are better put in growing my business as opposed to like go and finding that 5% thing, right?
Exactly. And it may not even be 5%. And the other thing too is if you're following the data that we shared today, that would lead to the conclusion that we do not see a spike in the number of foreclosed properties hitting the market.
True.
Because we see an increase in the number of foreclosure starts happening, but we don't see a sizable increase in the number of foreclosure finishes happening as well. So while I'm sure there's some opportunity, some of the starts are going to go into finishes. I wouldn't look at that as, if I was a real estate professional and trying to target, where I'm going to see my biggest gains coming up in the next year, I wouldn't look at as being that big opportunity. It's next to nothing right now. It will go up, but it's still not going to be substantial.
That makes a lot of sense, man. All right. Gerard Wendling has one last question here. Does JWB buy foreclosures for rehabbing? Is this an opportunity for you guys to increase inventory?
I mean, we used to do it a lot more when there were more foreclosures back in the day. There's just not a lot of foreclosures. I mean, there's less than 1% of all the homes that are sold on the market are foreclosures. So yes, it is one of our strategies. That's how we've purchased over 3,000 properties over the years. But over the last few years, just like the data, shows right there, it's certainly not one of our main ones. Our main strategy for buying and creating assets for you all as turnkey clients is to buy infill lots, and then we build new construction homes. That's the way that we've done it. And we've stockpiled a lot of land over the years to make sure that we have more than enough inventory for our clients, knowing that inventory is going to be scarce, like foreclosures are going to be scarce, which is what we expect in the near future as well.
Good stuff, man. All right, GC. Well, let's try to wrap this up in a bow, right? Let's try to knock out a YouTube reel, if you will. Headlines came in.
Say.
Huh? Yeah. Let's see if we can under 1 minute wrap up all the things that you have said over the last hour. I think that this is your superpower, right? So headlines came in. They said that foreclosure starts have gone up 15% over the last 6 months. And that is what people are reading. What is your advice? What do people need to know? And what do people need to take away from that information, GC?
My first advice is we have to separate data without perspective and data with perspective. Data without perspective would lead you to say that foreclosure starts are up 15%. So that might lead you to believe that we're in the middle of a budding foreclosure crisis, which would mean that there's going to be a real estate crash. But data with perspective helps you realize that 15% starts in foreclosures doesn't mean much, because the last year or two, we had next to zero foreclosures across our country, largely stemming from the foreclosure moratorium. And even more than that, what really would affect housing prices is foreclosure finishes, or the percentage of foreclosed sales that affect the marketplace. That's what would actually drop prices. And right now, we have less than 1% of all sales as foreclosures. So the media can try again and again, but this right here is not going to be the catalyst towards that real estate crash that they've been saying for so long.
Yeah. So if I was to add to anything that what GC is saying is basically there may be foreclosures being started, but that doesn't mean that home prices are going down anytime soon. It's still a good time to invest in rental income properties. When you look around and see what all the other asset classes are doing and the different types of like ups and downs that you've experienced and what that is, rental properties are still outpacing things in a more consistent fashion and a higher return than any investment of a similar risk profile, which is a very low one for rental properties. And it's still a good time to buy. And if you are thinking about doing that, then the next place to go to get your questions answered is chatwithjwb.com. Or if you're an existing client, talk to your portfolio manager and add another one to your belt there. GC, good call, man. We had around 70 people here today. They're back for the return of you and me back on the airways together after 2 weeks. I've missed it, man. When I showed up to your house today to go for a run, I was like, oh my God, give me a hug.
That was a great bear hug. What did I say to you? I said, don't ever do that to me again.
Dude, I never want to experience that. And I honestly, as I was away for 10 days on a European cruise of family reunion of 48, I got to say, I missed the JWB family. I really do appreciate Donna and Tony and Nadeem and Gerard and everybody that asked great questions and Jillian and Ken and Michael and Leslie showing up here, adding to the conversation. You take an hour of your day in the middle of the work week to show up and be a part of this community. And it is what makes this thing special. And it is what makes our job fun, man. So I just never goes, unnoticed by me that you show up. So thank you, community, for being here. Michael Santorios wants to know if in the next 5 minutes, you're going to do carpool karaoke, Gregg.
Oh man, maybe that would get people to stick around. I'll tell you that, but I don't know. I've been thinking about ideas for increasing viewership. You keep throwing them out there. Maybe we'll do that, Michael. I don't know. Let me know.
Oh my God, Michael, thank you so much for saying that. I'm never going to let him live that down. GC, any last words here?
Man, when you don't have something like the gang being back together for 3 weeks, you appreciate it so much. That's how I feel. Did want to say a special thank you to everybody who was here holding down the fort for both Pablo and myself as we were taking our family vacations. We just had incredible guests and continue to drive that value. But I'm excited, man. Can't wait to get back in the saddle on Thursday and do the JWB portfolio of the week, which is going to be fun. And yeah, big thank you to all of you. You make this all so special.
Yeah, right back at you. This Thursday, it's still a POTW, but now it's going to be the portfolio of the week.
Week.
Can't wait to see you there. Thanks for showing up, fam. Hope to see you Thursday. And just remember, don't be average. See you on the next one.